Okay.
You got the introduction.
Yeah, I do. And it's recording now, so here's the introduction here. You know, my fingers work on occasion.
Okay, we're live. We're recording the interview with Robert Bob Eisenach. This interview is being conducted by Jim Mitchell and Jeff Briggs from Wright State University Veteran Voices Project. This interview is being recorded at Bethany Village, Kettering, Ohio, and it's 10:45, August 14th, 2015. Morning, Bob.
Good morning.
How are you today?
I'm just fine, thank you.
Okay. Where were you born?
I was born up in Neenah, Wisconsin, a little town up near Green Bay.
And what did your parents do?
My father worked for a company called Kimberly-Clark, which today is still active, manufacturer of Kleenex and other products. And my mother was pretty much a housewife.
Okay. Do you have any brothers and sisters?
I had one sister who died of cancer about 15 years ago.
Wow. Okay, so a couple questions. You're a World War II vet, and one of the questions I've got for you is on December 7th, 1941, what were you doing?
Kind of interesting, I had turned 17 on December 1st, and I remember on Sunday morning I was listening to the radio, and all of a sudden the news came about the Pearl Harbor situation, and I decided that things were going to get pretty wild for me being 17 and subject to the draft when I became 18.
Okay, so you were 17, you turned 18.
I turned 18 the following December.
Okay, so what happened then?
Well, what happened is I graduated from high school in 1942, June, and knowing I was going to be drafted as of my 18th birthday, I started looking around for alternatives rather than going into the Army, which I thought I probably would do if I got drafted. And I took along with about 500 other people the test for the U.S. Academy, Naval Academy. I didn't make it, but apparently I tested well enough that the Navy said we're setting up a program for officers going to be called V-12, and we think you qualify for that. And what we'd like to have you do is start college, and we'll call you for active duty sometime before your 18th birthday so you don't get classified as an under-one draftee. So I started college at a little college in Wisconsin called Lawrence College in the fall of 1942. The Navy contacted me, put me through a series of physicals. I failed the eye exam because I could only see 18/20 rather than 20/20, but then they came back the next day and said the qualifications for a deck officer in the Navy are 18/20, so you do qualify, and so you're entered into the program. Now you've got to get yourself sworn in. I was only 17 years old, so I had to talk my mother into going with me to Milwaukee so she could sign the papers so I could be sworn in at the age of 17 into the Navy. So I remember the time I was sworn in was on November 11th, and the officer was swearing us in. It was about 3 minutes to 11. He said, I'll tell you what, there was about 4 or 5 other guys who was going to swear in. And he said, why don't we wait until 11 o'clock, and then you'll always remember you were sworn into the Navy on November 11th at 11th. You remember November 11th was very important, Armistice Day. When I was in high school and grade school, we stood at attention for a second at 11 o'clock. So I completed, do you want me to go on and tell you a little more? So I completed my year at Lawrence, and then they assigned me to a V-12 unit. And the Navy had understood that they were going to need a lot of more officers than they were getting from the academy and from college graduates, so they had dipped down into this pool of younger people such as myself, and were going to give us a year of college training, and then we're going to go into midshipman school for 90 days and then on to active duty. Luckily, I was assigned back to the same college I was attending, and so I ended up with about 300 other naval people that summer, July 1, and we were in training then until school started in the fall. And I spent 1 year academically at that college, and they had brought in some officers to teach courses, and it was pretty much the course that they taught at the academy. There was lots of math, lots of physics, things like this, things that I really wasn't that good at, but I struggled through most of them. And so, kind of ironically, I was the only person out of the 300 that was sent immediately to midshipman school. And I was sent immediately to Northwestern University Midshipman School in the summer of 1944, right after I had gotten through the first year. All the other people were sent to Asbury Park, New Jersey, for holding to go into other schools. I don't know why this happened, but it happened. Anyway, so I arrived at Northwestern, and it was a very intense 90-day program, very, very intense. And I worked my tail off because when the first day we sat down in the auditorium, and the commandant said to us, "Look to your left and look to your right, because when we finish, one of you isn't going to be there," which kind of scared the hell out of us. So we really worked. I worked very, very hard. I ended up with getting literally perfect grades in every score. So finally, the day of being commissioned arrived, and after commissioning, we received our orders. What we did is we stood outside the commandant's office, and we went in alphabetically. So all the ABCs, and finally got to the E's. All the doors coming out all the people coming out the other door were going to Fort Pierce, Florida for small boat training. And they were all smiling. It's getting cold in Chicago, and said, "Boy, we're going to get a lot of sunshine," so forth and so on. I walked in, and the commandant got up and he said, "Son, you did a very good job at midshipman school, and I'm going to reward you." And I said, "You are?" And he said, "Yes." He said, "You're going to sea." He gave me my orders. My orders were to report to the 7th Amphibious Fleet, wherever it may be. So wherever it may be, it was Hollandia, New Guinea. So that started my journey from midshipman school to San Francisco, aboard a Dutch transport called the Dakota into across the South Pacific to Manus Island, and finally to Hollandia, New Guinea. I was given in San Francisco 20 enlisted men, all to take them back to New Guinea. Every one of them had been on duty before in the South Pacific, returning for the second duty. I was a young ensign, bright young brass gold star or gold bar, and these guys really didn't want to have me command them, and so when we finally crossed the equator, they were all shellbacks, and I was a pollywog. And I can tell you, that day I was so beat up, they cut off half my hair. As you well aware of an interview in the Navy, the shellbacks who have crossed the equator take over and initiate the polywogs into being a shellback. Anyway, I did arrive in Hollandia, New Guinea, and that's kind of the journey I made to my first duty station.
Okay, so did you have any training in amphibious warfare before you?
None.
So you just showed up at the?
None. Ironically, I had been born in Wisconsin. I had never seen a Navy ship. I had never seen an ocean before.
So you were assigned to an LST.
LST, landing ship tank.
Is there any other nicknames they had for that?
Well, they had large soul target, was one.
And what exactly was an LST?
An LST was a ship about 300 and some feet long. It contained about 110 enlisted men and about 7 or 8 officers. And it had a large tank deck below with doors in the front that would open up and a ramp that would go down. And the LST was designed to go up onto the beach carrying troops and tanks, but there were no tanks in the South Pacific. They were carrying half tracks and marine equipment and so forth and so on. And when things got cleared enough on the beach that we could go thing, the LST would run up on the beach, and as we were running up on the beach, we would drop what's called a stern anchor. And that was so that when we got onto the beach, we could ramp ourselves back off eventually. Once we got onto the beach, the doors would open, the ramp would come down, and the vehicles could move from the front of the LST onto the dock. During invasions, we would carry probably 1,500 Marines or Army personnel and their equipment, and we would carry 4 or 5 what are called LSVPs, which are small boats, and those are the ones that ran into the shore, carrying probably 18 or 20, up to 40 enlisted men or troops to take over the beach. And then also during invasions, we would get aboard a medical team of 4 doctors and about 20 corpsmen, and we would take wounded off the beach, and the doctors would treat what they could do for them until the hospital ships could get in, and then they'd be transferred to the hospital ships. And we would get those doctors aboard about 2 or 3 weeks before we went on the invasion. Then they'd stay with us through the invasion, then they'd leave. Ironically, it's kind of funny, all these doctors were pulled from private practice. They were all given titles of lieutenant commander. They had no interest in being in the Navy. They would much rather be back at their private practices. And so we had lots of fun playing poker in the wardroom with them and doing other things.
So, how many amphibious landings did you participate in?
I participated in actually 4. One was in Lingayen Gulf, which is the northern part of the Philippines, and that was the second landing. The first landing was at Leyte Gulf in the southern part of the Philippines, and that was the initial landing. And I was not aboard for that. That was in October of '44. I came aboard in January of '45, and then the ship went all the way up to the northern part of the Philippines to a part called Lingayen Gulf, and they landed troops which were going to come overland to the city of Manila. And once we landed troops at Lingayen Gulf, then we came around and supported the operations in Manila Gulf and evacuated Corregidor, which is famous, of course, for the Bataan March and all this. And that was the first one. And then second ones were operations in the southern Philippines, Mindanao and some other islands where we cleaned up. And then the third invasion was one that most people don't even know we did, which was done in July 4th, 1945, which was the invasion of Borneo. And we picked up Australian troops. It was totally Australian operation. We picked up Australian troops and they landed at Borneo. The reason for doing that, they were afraid that the Japanese were now in pretty well retreat in the Pacific, would set all the oil wells in Burma ashore, afire, and that's the reason they wanted to get troops into Borneo. So that was the last invasion of World War II. That was the ones I was involved in.
Okay, when you were in these landings, were they opposed landings?
Oh, yes. Yes.
And was there a lot of...
The worst problem was the kamikazes. The Japanese at this point in time were really losing the war in the South Pacific. There's no question about it. So they had turned to what is called a kamikaze fighter, which is a Japanese fighter willing to give up his life to bomb a ship. And they would come in and actually they could dive at your ship to try to explode into the ship. And of course, an LST loaded with 1,500 men and troops were a very attractive target. So when we traveled in a convoy, the LST would be well protected in the middle of the convoy because we were the prime target that these guys wanted, because they knew that we were carrying the invasion troops that would come ashore. So that was kind of our main concern. There was really not too much action, frankly, in any of the invasions I was in on the beach themselves. They'd pretty well moved inland by the time that we landed troops. There was some firing on the beach, but I don't think there were many casualties that I recall of people on the beach. Most of the casualties were done after we had landed the troops and they moved on inland. And then we would receive those type of casualties or injuries back aboard the LST for further protection or further recovery type things.
Okay, so you're in the Pacific, and you're serving, you participate in 3 amphibious landings.
Yes.
And the biggest fear was the kamikaze.
Yes.
What was ship life like when you weren't involved in actual combat?
As I described it, it was 7 days of boring and 10 minutes of terror. Actually, life was pretty routine aboard ship. What I was a deck officer, which means that I stood watch on the deck. I would have command of the ship for a 4-hour period, and then I would be relieved, and we had 3 other people who stood deck officers, so I would stand every 4th thing. The worst one was, remember, was the one from 12 a.m. to 4 a.m. I was the only person aboard ship who was really awake, other than we'd have a yachtsman or a steersman and a couple lookouts and a signalman and myself, and it was kind of scary up there because I knew that if I fell asleep or anything happened, we were in trouble, because we would have a ship loaded with tanks and or with equipment and troops and moving along in the middle of the convoy. But generally, the things were pretty routine. If we got in real trouble, we had a tube that went right into the captain's thing, and he said, "Don't wake me unless you have a major problem." So once in a while, if we really got in trouble, we would, get the captain out of bed and say, "Captain, we got a problem, we need some advice," and he would come up and help us, but that was pretty rare.
Did it take you a while to get accustomed to being on a ship?
It took me quite a while to be accustomed to knowing what I was doing, yes, absolutely. And in the Navy, anyone who's been in the Navy knows that the old boatswain's mates run the ship. They're the ones. We had 3 or 4.
So did you adopt the chief petty officer
Yes.
to break you in?
Yes.
Now, did you physically have any issues with like seasickness or
No.
anything
No,
like that?
I had vertigo stomach. I had no problem with that. The one experience I have, which is very kind of interesting, is when I reported to the LST, it already had left Hollandia, New Guinea, and was on its way to the Philippines. And so the little wave in the office said, "Well, come back tomorrow, Ensign, because I think I can get you on a destroyer, which is going to be assigned to the convoy doing picket duty." And I said, "Okay." So the next day she says, "All set, the destroyer's going to leave tomorrow morning, and you're a passenger aboard it." So after about 5 days, we finally caught up with the LST in convoy, and the captain of the destroyer said, "Well, we're going to send you on over to your ship." And I said, "You're going to send me over?" And they said, "Yes." So they finally got the 2 ships in alignment, and they send the line across, and they're testing the line, and the first thing they tested was to send a movie across. The most important thing in the Navy was the movie, far and away. If you could get a new movie for your ship, you were a hero, absolute hero. Because we showed the same movie sometimes 8 and 10 times, and the guys would get so bored that they could say the speech before the actor did. Anyway, we got a new movie from the destroyer, so that was good news with the LST. And then the chief boatswain mates said, "Okay, Ensign, you're going over next." So he got me all signed up, all hooked up, and I started across that thing. I was never so scared in my life. I'm going across with my eyes clenched and that. Finally, I made it to the LST, but I remember as I was starting out, the boatswain's mate said to me, "Ensign," he said, "I'll tell you what." He said, "I'll send you across first, because if you don't make it, you ain't gonna need that gear." So anyway, across I went, and I reported to the captain. And the captain said, "Boy, am I happy to see you. I need a new officer so really bad. I just lost one." And he said, "I hope you're qualified to stand duty." And I said, "Sir, I just graduated from midshipman school about 3 weeks ago or 4 weeks ago." And he said, "Oh." They sent me another one. Anyway, well, he finally trained me, and I did get to be, I think, a pretty reasonable, capable officer. But my entry aboard LST 241 was quite memorable, with all the enlisted men hanging over. Who was this young ensign that's coming over? They couldn't pronounce my name.
They were taking bets to see if you would make it across.
So I became Mr. Ike.
That
I
makes
understand.
sense.
Mr. Ike and Mr. E.
Mr. E.
Yeah.
So you were actually in the Pacific on this day 70 years ago when the war was, VJ Day was declared. What was your reaction and what was your crew's reaction?
You know, the only way we heard things there was through, there was no radar or anything like that, or, I mean, no things, so things came, you know, by almost multiple voice from one ship to the other, or sometimes over the radio. So we finally heard that some big bomb had dropped in Japan. And then about 3 days later, we heard that another big bomb had dropped in Japan. And then we heard the war was over. And we were in Lady Gulf at this point, and I think every ship in the harbor that evening was shooting off their ferry pulses, their 24, their 48.
Bomb
Oh,
guns,
it was a crazy night. And it was just absolute delight, of course. And we were scheduled at that point to, the V-Day, the invasion of Japan has already been set at that point of time. We already had the battle plan for it. The captain would let us come in one at a time and read the battle plan in very secret standings, obviously. And it was set for October, I think it was October 15th, but it was in the month of October. And our LST was going to be part of a group that was going to invade the southern island of Japan. And then as we understood it, then the 3rd and 5th fleets were going to come around and invade the northern part of Japan, and then they were going to do a pincher down the thing. And we were so relieved when we hear that, you know, that bomb dropped, and we were knocked, that whole thing, that whole mission was scuttled. That was very, 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 very exciting night, I can tell you.
So, okay, the war is over.
Yes.
You're still in the Pacific. How long did you remain in the Pacific? And
Our ship
did you
then
have-
was assigned to go to the various Philippine islands and pick up Japanese, I don't know what they were at that time, I guess they were no longer prisoners, I guess they were just Japanese citizens. And we picked up hundreds of them. We'd load them onto the tank deck of the LST, we'd carry 4,000 or 5,000 of the times. We'd take them back to Lady Gulf, and then they would load them into Liberty ships to take them back to the mainland. And we did that until, January of 46. We did hundreds of pickups of these troops all through the islands. And at that point, then we got orders to depart from Subic Bay, the Philippines, back to the United States. The LST would go about 11 knots flag speed. Average speed was about 10 knots, so we would travel about 200 some miles a day across the whole Pacific from the Philippines to San Diego. We finally made it after about 20 days to Pearl Harbor. We started in there for about a week, and then we made the rest of the trip on to San Diego. Terribly boring trip.
Now, did you bring other GIs back with you?
No.
So
Empty
no
boat.
cargo, just the ship and
Just
you
the ship.
guys.
Empty boat.
Empty boat, yeah, they brought the empty boat back. Got it in San Diego, and we were supposed to then take it on to Charleston, North Carolina for decommissioning. But they took a look at the ship and decided they would decommission it right in San Diego. So at that point, I was discharged from that ship and had orders to report back to Great Lakes training. So I said, gee, I'm going to get released. I'm going to Great Lakes. I'll be home in another 3 or 4 months. I mean, another couple of weeks. I get to Great Lakes and report in, and as they said, we're going to give you a 30-day leave, and then you're going to report to LST 1096 for further duty, which is in Tokyo. So I spent some leave, and I got back to the Great Lakes, and they assigned me then to go to Seattle to Tokyo. I got out to Seattle, and again, the little wave in the office said, "Sir, I don't think that," I was a JG at this point, "I don't think that ship's in Tokyo at all. Let me hunt for a day or two, come back tomorrow." And I came back tomorrow, and she said that ship is in dry dock in up the Napa River in San Francisco. So she said, "I'm sending you down there." She said, "I don't know why they need another officer, but those are your orders to." So I was sent down to Napa, California, on a ship that was in dry dock. So I sat there for about a month signing papers. And then we finally took the ship up the Napa River under the Golden Gate and up to the head of the Columbia River, got a guide at that point, and came up to Columbia and put it into mothballs in Portland, Oregon. And then I stayed for about another 3 weeks signing papers in Portland, and finally was discharged in about July of 46. And that ended my active naval career. So I was in from technically I was in from November 1942 until about June of 46.
So what did you do when you got out?
Went back to college, GI Bill.
And?
Completed college and decided I needed a little more education, so I went to the University of Pittsburgh and took a master's degree in the field of retailing. After I talked to a couple of department stores, I decided I really didn't want to do that. And so I got a job as a salesman for the company my father worked for, Kimberly-Clark, covering the states of Texas. And in 1 year I drove almost 40,000 miles. And I decided I really didn't want to do that, so I applied to 3 graduate programs for an MBA. Stanford, Northwestern, and Harvard. And I got accepted, not because of my grade, but I think because I was a veteran, at Harvard and Northwestern. I finally went to Northwestern because I could get through in 1 year as opposed to 2 years at Harvard. I didn't have any money at that point, I just had the GI Bill. And at that point, a little company from Dayton, Ohio, I'd never heard of Dayton, by the name of the Meat Corporation, offered me a interesting job down here. So I said, "Where do I fly into Cleveland?" And they said, no, we have our own airport. I had no idea where Dayton was. So anyway, I came to Dayton and got a job with the Meat Corporation, and I've been here ever since. I retired from the Meat Corporation in 1983.
Okay, so what did you do for Mead?
I was in the executive program. I was a vice president in the paper area, and then I was in the staff thing. I ended up the last 10 years as executive assistant to the chairman of the board. And so I had some interesting duties, both internationally and domestically.
Cool.
Yeah.
So, were you married? Or did
I got married to a gal I met in Dayton after I arrived. She was in social work, and we met and got married in 1953, and are about to celebrate our 63rd anniversary at the end of the month.
Well,
Okay. Okay, today's October 23rd, 2015. We're doing a follow-up interview with Bob Eisenach, real name Robert, goes by Bob. And my name is Terry Ramirez, and I will be doing the interview today. So this is really just a follow-up interview to an interview that we did earlier. So Bob, to start off with, talk about your training. Did you get any specialized training while you were in the military?
Well, what happened is I became 17 on December 1, 1941. So I completed my completed my year of high school. and all of us were talking about what we were going to do next. Were we going to go into the Marines, the Navy, so forth and so on. So during the summer, I took a test that the Navy put out, and apparently I did well enough, so they said that they were going to put together a program called V12, which is a training program for potential officers in the Navy. In order to protect us from the draft, we had to be sworn into the Navy by the time we were 18. And then we were so I was sworn in on November 11th, I remember this very well, it was November 11th at 11 p.m., because the officer in charge said, I'll swear you guys in at 11:11, and then you'll never forget the time you're sworn in. So they said at that point, the Navy said, you're now in the Navy officially, but we want you to go on to college, and then we're going to call you at the end of your first year in college and put you into a program called V12. The V12 program will send you to a college in uniform as an official apprentice seaman. We will keep you there for a year, give you 2 semesters of college, and we'll give you the same curriculum that we're offering the people in Annapolis, for the candidates in Annapolis. So I was assigned to a little college in Wisconsin called Lawrence University. I went there on July 1, 1943, and I completed 2 semesters there. It was a very difficult year because they forced us to take a lot of courses that we really didn't want to take, such as calculus, advanced calculus, physics, power, and so forth and so on, but I managed to scrape through. At that point, I was sent immediately to Northwestern University in Chicago to a midshipman school. There were midshipman schools located at this point in Chicago, Notre Dame, and Columbia, New York. I arrived at midshipman school in early part of July, forced to become a 90-day wonder, and that took a lot of training. We went through various things. We sailed on Lake Michigan and fired guns, we did a lot of sailing, we took courses on navigation, and we spent a lot of time in classrooms, we spent a lot of time marching, we spent a lot of time doing flag training and Morse code and these various things. So at the end of that period, it was now October 1944. So at that point I was commissioned an ensign in the Navy, and my orders at that point were read, report to the 7th Amphibious Fleet wherever it may be. Wherever it may be was Hollandia, New Guinea. So I was immediately detached from Chicago to San Francisco. I stayed in San Francisco for about 10 days waiting for transportation. I finally got assigned to a transport ship that was going on its way to Manus Island and then to New Guinea. We were at sea for 20 days. I was assigned 20 enlisted men to deliver in Hollandia. Every one of them was on the return visit to the Pacific. I was a brand new ensign with a shiny gold bar. My duty was to get them up 1/2 hour before sunrise, because that's when torpedoes would hit if they were going to hit the ship, and then they had to stand at attention by the lifeboat until half an hour after sunrise, and then they were dismissed to go have breakfast and do things. To get them out of bed at 6 a.m. in the morning before sunrise was not a very easy task. I was called all sorts of things, Sonny, Junior, so forth and so on. But anyway, finally I arrived in Hollandia, New Guinea. And I found out I was assigned to a ship called LST-245, which was part of an amphibious corps. The LST-245 had already left the port of Hollandia, New Guinea, on its way to an invasion of the Philippines. So the little wave in the office in New Guinea said, I'll tell you what, Ensign, there's a couple of destroyers that will move much faster than the convoy, and they're assigned to do picket duty with the convoy, so we'll assign you to one of the destroyers, and then when you catch up with the convoy, you'll go alongside the LST-245 and we'll send you over to the ship. They didn't tell me exactly how I was going to get from the destroyer to the LST, so about 4 or 5 days later we arrived alongside the LST. And one of the problems was the destroyer couldn't go slow enough, the LST couldn't go fast enough to get themselves in sync. Finally, the two captains got the boats in command, so they shot the rope, the wire across from one ship to another and made sure it was taut. And then the next thing they did, they tested it by sending a movie across. The most important thing in the Navy was a brand new movie for the ship. So the ships traded movies. So the destroyer had one that the LST hadn't seen and vice versa. So the movie went back and forth and that moved okay. So the next thing was the chief boatswain mate said, "I'll tell you what, Ensign, you're next." And he said, "I'm going to hook you up, put you in this harness, and we'll send you over to the LST." I was scared to death. Finally got hooked up. These boats are moving this way, the waves are coming this way. So he says to me, the corpsman says to me, "I'll tell you what, Ensign," he says, "why don't I send you over first, and then I'll send your gear over later. Because if you don't make it, you aren't going to need that gear." So anyway, I get on this thing, I'm scared to death, my teeth are clenched, my eyes are closed, and I go across this thing, bouncing. Finally, I get aboard the ship LST. So that was my entrance into the Navy as far as my first assignment was concerned. At this point, I report to the captain of the LST. And he said, "Boy, am I happy to get a new officer aboard." He said, "I just lost one of my officers on leave, and he said, we're running short-handed. I assume that you're qualified to stand watch." And I said, "Sir, I just graduated from midshipman school about 3 weeks ago." And his comment was, "Oh, the Navy sent me another one." "Well, I'll tell you what, Ensign," he said, we're going into an invasion. So I don't want you up on deck until you know what you're doing. So when the ship goes to general quarters, I want you to go to the wardroom and play solitary and look out the porthole at what we're doing until I can get you trained." So I earned my first battle star, sitting in the wardroom, watching an invasion out the porthole window.
Where was that at?
This is the Philippines. In a
Okay.
place called Lingayen Gulf, which is the northern part of the Philippines, Luzon Island.
Okay.
The LST landed troops there, and then the troops moved over the top of the island of Luzon and took over the city of Manila.
Uh-huh.
And then we went around and came back and supported the operation in the city of Manila, liberated Corregidor, which is famous, of course, because of the big Malanta Tower, and that's where the Bataan March took place. And after that, I did get pretty well qualified, and I was able to stand watch, and the rest of my Navy experience aboard LST went much smoother than the entrance. What would happen during the invasions? We would get, first of all, we would have probably 1,500 troops aboard, and sometimes we would have a lot of their equipment, such as half-tracks. There were no tanks in the South Pacific, they couldn't use it. So we would have half-tracks and military equipment that the Marines needed or the Army troops needed in our deck below in this LST. We would go up on the beach, open up the front, and a ramp would go down, and these would drive off onto the beach. But this didn't happen until the beach was pretty well cleared from things. So first, we would have about probably 1,500 men aboard who would go into the beach on little, called LCVPs, which are small boats that held about 40 men each, and they would go into the beach on waves. So after the beach was reasonably secure, then the LSTs would go in and unload their equipment. Then after that, we would pull off the beach, and for invasions, we would get a military group aboard, which would consist of about 14 medical corpsmen and 3 or 4 doctors. And then we'd take wounded off from the beach until the hospital ships could come in and take them, and these doctors would try to do whatever they could to keep them stable until they could get them to the hospital ships. And the doctors were very interesting. All the doctors were pulled out of private practice. They were all made lieutenant commanders. They really hated the Navy because all of a sudden they were pulled from their private practice where they're making all kind of money. and we're paid probably $250 a month for being lieutenant commander in the Navy. So they had many poker games in the wardroom, and they had to spend all their day waiting until the invasion happened, and then they worked like mad, of course. So I spent about a year in the Pacific. I went through 2 more invasions in the southern Philippines, and then we made the last invasion of World War II, which was an invasion of Borneo. And this was done in July 4, 1945, the last invasion before the bomb was dropped and the war ended. And the reason that they invaded Borneo, and we did this with Australian troops, was that they were very worried that the Japanese were obviously losing the war at that point, would set all the oil fields in Borneo afire and have a mess, so they wanted to get that area secured. So we landed troops there, Australian troops, and they secured that area. At this point, we returned to Leyte Gulf in the Philippines. We already had orders for an invasion of Japan. Japan was to be invaded in October of 1945. And our ship was scheduled to go to the southern island along with a whole flotilla of other ships to make a landing on the southern island of Japan. And then sometime later, the 3rd and 5th fleets were going to make landings north of Tokyo, and then there's going to be a pincher mover down the country of Japan trying to liberate it. Luckily, the bomb dropped, and at this point, things were very confusing. We didn't have communications the way we have them today. We didn't have the internet. We didn't have this. We had radio that didn't really work very well. So we were getting these kind of really fuzzy messages that a big bomb of some kind had happened in Japan. And then about 3 or 4 days later, we got another thing that another big bomb had dropped in Japan. And then 4 or 5 days later, we got word that the war was over, that the Japanese had surrendered. So we were all in the harbor of Leyte Gulf, and that was a spectacle that evening. People were shooting off guns and varied pistols. It was just like the 4th of July, and there was, we were all celebrating our history, or our fact that the war was over, and we were. So the next several months after that, we were assigned to go to the various islands of the Philippines and pick up Japanese, I don't know what they were at this point, I guess they weren't prisoners, they were just Japanese troops who were stationed all on these islands. We would bring them back to Leyte Gulf, and then they would load them on to Liberty ships and take them back to the mainland of Japan. And we probably picked up, well, I'd say maybe 10, 12,000 Japanese in these various islands around. And this is now, I think, about December 45, when we got orders to come back to the United States. So we left the Philippines by ourselves, one ship, the LST-245, made our way across the northern Pacific, stopped in Guam, stopped in Pearl Harbor, and went on to San Diego. LST was a very slow ship. We went about 9 or 10 knots or miles per hour, which meant in a 24-hour day we would maybe move 200, 250 nautical miles at best. So it took a long time. It took us almost 30 days to make that trip across the Pacific into San Diego. At that point, I was giving 30 days leave. I came from Wisconsin, so I was sent to my home in Wisconsin with orders to report back to Great Lakes when I finished the 30 days. I assumed I was going to be discharged. I reported into Great Lakes, I would say probably must have been January, late January of 46, hoping that they would give me a discharge at that point. Instead, I was told that I had been reassigned to LST 1096, which is located in Tokyo. So I was given orders to proceed to Seattle for further transportation to Tokyo. I got to Seattle and the little wave in the office said, "Sir, I'm not really sure where that ship is. Why don't you give me a day or so to work on it? So come back tomorrow and I'll find out more definite. And she came back the next day, she had a big smile. She said, that ship's not in Tokyo, that ship's in dry dock in Napa, California. So Ensign, you're on your way down to, I was JG at this point, Lieutenant, you're on your way to Napa, California. So I arrived and became a officer, mostly signing papers, frankly. It was in dry dock, up the Napa River, which is about as wide as this room we're in. And the only time we could get it out of there, finally, to take it up to Portland in mothballs was when the tide was very high in the evening. So after about 3 or 4 or 5 weeks there, we finally got orders to proceed down the Napa River under the Golden Gate Bridge, out to sea and take it up to Astoria, Oregon. We got a pilot at that point, and the pilot took us up the Columbia River, and then we went into a dock in Portland, and I spent another month there, I guess, signing papers and getting the ship decommissioned into dry dock. And then at that point I was sent home and released from the Navy. So that's kind of a thumbhole quick sketch of my career, so to speak. A couple of the funny stories I love to tell people is one of the assignments that I had was beer officer aboard ship. We had about 400 or 500 cases of beer, and the only time we would use them is when we were on the beach, and the captain would put 20, 30, 40 cases of this beer in the locker, get them almost frozen. We would take it over on the beach, and then the enlisted men could play baseball, whatever they wanted to do, and they could drink as much beer as they wanted. The only rule the captain had said, I can't have anyone drunk on my ship. So his definition of drunk was I had to send a cargo net down and take him aboard by a cargo net. So we never had a drunk. You could climb aboard, you could be carried aboard, you could be carried aboard by your buddies. So we never had a drunk to report aboard ship. And we had these cases of beer in a locker. And the captain got the whole crew together one day, and he said, all this beer is in this locker, and it's going to be connected with a little cheap lock, and there are 2 keys. One I have, one the ensign has. And he said, I'll tell you what, he had the whole crew assembled at attention. If that beer locker is ever broken into without my authority, he said, I'm going to open it up, and the ensign and I are going to throw every case of beer over the side, and you're going to watch them sink. So the rest of the time, we never had a problem with our beer locker. It never got open in the evening, never got tacked. So that's one of the funny stories I love to tell people about being the beer officer aboard LST.
Was there a problem before that?
I don't think so.
Oh.
I don't think so.
He just set the record straight.
He just set the record straight, yes, yeah. But the enlisted men loved that. That gave them some relief from the perils of war, and things were not good. Some of those guys had been over there for 2 years.
Yeah.
It was terrible.
Can you talk about what your duties included? Like, did
Yes.
you... I guess just go into what your duties included.
Yes, what I was a watch officer. And a watch officer meant I was officer of the deck. When we were underway, I was in charge of the ship, so to speak. I would be up on the con in charge of moving the ship along. And I would have complete authority of what speed we were going, where we were going, so forth and so on, based on, obviously, where we were supposed to go. And if anything happened that I was really nervous about or concerned, then we had a tube down to the captain, and we could make contact with the captain and say, Captain, I'm in trouble up here. I don't like something I see, or think I better have you come up, and he'd come up and help us out. Mm-hmm. That was very, very rare. And and then I was also gunnery officer, which meant I was in charge of the guns aboard ship. We had a chief gunnery officer who was really the guy who ran the place, so to speak. He was the crew chief for all the guns, and we had 20 millimeters, 40 millimeters, so forth and so on. And it's kind of a funny story. When a Japanese plane would come over, everyone would shoot at him. If the plane would go down, everyone would mark a kill, because no one knew who hit him. All we knew that someone hit him. And so I think probably there were more planes marked as kills than ever were documented kills. And then when we go on shore, I became what's called a landing officer. I would have some responsibility of getting things off from the ship onto the beach, which meant laying in sometimes a platoon, some
Tracking.
type of a ramp out to the beach so that the half-tracted things could not get stuck in the sand and go onto the beach. And so that's kind of the basic orders. The watches would take place. We had four people who were watch officers, which means every 4 hours, I was on watch for 4 hours, off for 12. And then for meals we'd go on at 4, and then we'd have meals, and then go back on 6 to 8. So there's a break in there so people could have meals. And underway, that was pretty much our day. We would stand watch and sleep, and there was a lot of reading of books, and someone said a lot of boredom, and then a few minutes of agony, fear,
Can you talk about, you said you went around, when you were in the Philippines, you landed at Laguna?
Lagayan,
Lagayan, okay.
Lagayan Gulf, which is way up on the top of Luzon. And that invasion was in January '45.
And then you went around to Manila.
They came around and supported Manila. Manila was the city of Manila.
How was that? How did that work out? What did you do when you were in Manila supporting the troops? I guess they worked across land.
They worked across the way. By the time we got to Manila, was pretty well secure. Yes.
So did you just pick them up, or?
We didn't do anything with them. We were just in the port to be there as kind of a safeguard in case anything came up.
Oh, I see.
And then we went on from there. I think we went on from there back to somewhere. We went from there and loaded up again, and then we went on to another invasion later on in Mindanao, which is another big island on the lower part,
Southern part of.
southern part.
Can you talk about evacuating Corregidor?
I know a little bit about it. I went into the tunnel, which is huge, Molanta Tower, which is huge, and of course that's where MacArthur was, and that's where there were probably 5,000 American troops that were stationed in the tower, and of course that's where MacArthur, they escaped out of there, and then he went to Australia from the tower in the middle of the night, because they were going to save him, because they wanted him to become the commander of the invasion things. And my understanding was, and I've not heard this documented anywhere, but my understanding was that when we invaded the place, that that was full of Japanese, and most of them took their lives in the tunnel. They would not be captured. I have never seen this documented anywhere, but that was my understanding from the people who were there, that very few of the Japanese came out of that tunnel alive.
Is that the place where the Japanese brought the Americans to?
What happened?
Was that part of
the Americans that were in the tunnel, then they took them on what's called the Bataan March, and they marched them across the area of Bataan into a Japanese prisoner camp.
So they were taking them from the tunnel to?
From the tunnel
okay.
to a prisoner camp, probably about 100 miles inland in the Philippines. Mm-hmm. And so many of those people died on that march. I mean, it's a forced march. Many of these people were just without food, without water, and they were dropping all along the way. And I think almost half of them never got to the camp. And I understand those that got to camp are treated very, very badly, from what I hear.
Yeah.
And then about 20 years ago, my wife and I went back to the Philippines and went through the whole thing again, visited the tunnels, now a big tourist attraction, of course. And there was a Hotel Manila there, and General MacArthur had a suite of rooms in the front of it, and that's where he stayed. That was his home in Manila. So I went into the hotel and I said, would it be possible to see the general suite? And she said, oh yes, sir, I'll even rent it to you, come on up. So we went in and had a tour of the general suite, and they rented it by the day. And it was, some of his trinkets were there, some of his medals are still on the wall. I never saw General MacArthur. The only time I ever saw General MacArthur was when he ran for president. You may remember, 1951 or 52. He came to Chicago. I was going to business school at Northwestern, and he came to Chicago. And he was in a parade on Michigan Avenue, and I remember seeing the general at that point. That's the only time I ever saw him. We didn't have any ranking officers. You know, the captain of our ship was lieutenant commander, and if we ever saw a captain, well, that was like God. You know, that was big brass.
Did you see combat?
Well, I saw combat in the sense that yeah, we got fired on and we got hit, and I didn't get hit, thank the Lord. But our ship got hit a couple times. No one was killed when I was aboard, thank the Lord.
That was going to be.
And what was happening at that point, the Japanese were starting to lose the war. So the Japanese were taking up something called kamikazes. And what they were doing is these pilots were taking it on themselves to point their plane at a ship and then just run it right into the ship and explode it. And after the start worked so well, the Japanese took this up as a tactic. And I didn't go to Okinawa, which was a terrible battle, and Iwo Jima was even worse. But at Okinawa, their tactic was kamikaze bombing. They were doing that almost to every ship. And I talked to several people who are on destroyers and said that was a scary thing in the world, where these 3 or 4 or 5 kamikazes would come out one after the other, and they would shoot at them, and it didn't make a difference. They still came right in and plowed into the ship.
So it wasn't just one kamikaze airplane,
One
it
after
was
the
multiple
other. They were
at the same
yeah,
ship.
Yeah, they're all committing suicide one after the other into the ship. Yeah. I did earn three battle stars for invasions, and we received, of course, medals from the Philippine government for action.
Okay, I'm going to switch gears now. I'm going to ask you about friendships, camaraderie, and friendships that you made while you were in the service, and camaraderie amongst the troops, and talk about your friendships and camaraderie.
Well, one of the great stories is there were no blacks, of course, at that point that served other than as stewards mates. And we had 2 stewards mates aboard ship, both black, who served the officers. They did our laundry, they served our meals, and one was named Casey Cotton. And Casey couldn't write well enough to write a letter. So I would get a letter. So he came to me one time and he said, I need to write a letter to my mother. And he said, would you help me? And I said, certainly. So he gave me the address and everything. So I said, what do you want to tell your mother, Casey? Well, I want to tell him I'm all right. So we wrote a letter to his mother. So that started correspondence. We'd send a letter, and about a month later, I get a letter back called Mr. Ship's Officer, in charge of Casey, whatever his name was, Casey, LST 2, and she'd say, haven't heard from my son for a while. Would you please have him send me a letter? So I would get Casey into the wardroom, and I'd say, Casey, we got to write a letter to your mom. Okay, I'll write her a letter. What do you want to say? Same thing he said before, but we'd write her same letter, and she was happy about it. So we had that kind of thing. The officers were a pretty closely knit group. We lived together. This is a very small ship. We ate together, we lived together, we suffered together, and we took care of each other. And enlisted men lived in the deck below in quite cramped quarters. This was a reasonably small ship, and we had about 110 enlisted men and about 8 officers. And it was quite crowded area. So we got to know each other pretty well. The enlisted men were kind of offish to the officers, and, you know, we tried to maintain some kind of dignity and record with them, being friendly but not too friendly. And I remember the chiefs used to love to play poker. I loved to play poker, so they would invite me down to play poker in a poker game. So it'd be about 4 or 5 chiefs. The chiefs ran the Navy. Chiefs, these are chief boats and mates, and they ran everything. I mean, the officers didn't run much. We were kind of there, but they ran the ship. And so they would have these poker games. So I would sit in the poker games and play poker with the chiefs and have a great time. We'd laugh and cheer, and when someone won a pot, we'd clap and so forth and so on. So I think we had a good time, and frankly, I've kept up with a couple people from the ship, but we haven't really kept up. One thing we did do is all the people, we got hold of a lot of people who graduated from Northwestern Midshipman School. And we established a Northwestern Midshipman alumni group. And it probably ended up with 100, 120 people, not all from the same class, but from different classes. And we would travel to various places, mostly naval bases. We went to Hawaii, we went to Seattle, we went to Annapolis, and our wives would go with us, and we would have 2 or 3 days of touring and visiting, and had a great time. And that group has held together pretty well. It's pretty well dissipated now because most of them are gone.
Are they from all over then?
All over the country, yeah. And I'm one of the youngest ones. I will be 91 here in a month, and I'm one of the youngest people of that group because many of these people were made officers and like after college in 1941, 42, and they would be 96, 97, 98. Most of them are gone.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really tough to find, you know, any comrades anymore who are alive, truthfully.
While you were aboard the LST?
Landing ship tank. Landing ship tank.
Okay, that was one of my questions.
A landing ship tank is about 300 feet long, 350 feet long, and it houses, I say, about 110 listed men, about 8 officers. It had twin screws in the back, and then it had a large tank deck underneath, and then it had doors on the front that would open up, and a ramp would come down so you could drive things off from the tank deck onto the beach.
Mm-hmm.
And when you went onto the beach, one of the most important one of the most important things was to drop what's called a stern anchor at exactly the right time, so you could use a stern anchor to pull yourself off the beach. You had to winch it off the beach. You'd have your engines running full backwards, but you still needed to have that anchor out there pulling as well. You get stuck on the beach. It's tough because the boat would run up there full speed up on the beach. We'd be pretty well stuck up there. Mm-hmm. And these were all made because we knew that after the Japanese went into Pearl Harbor that we were going to have a prolonged war in the Pacific, and so they started to build these. And they built one every 3 months. And most of them were built in Evansville, Indiana. And I think they built 400 or 500 of these in Evansville. And they were, I think at the end of the war, they were cranking them out in 90 days. And they're just welding these things together, and they were not the greatest ships, but somehow and every one of them now has been junked. There's one left. There's one left in Evansville that they've kept and brought it up to date, called the 325, and you can go there today and visit that and go aboard it.
Huh.
Yeah.
Okay, so how did you stay in touch with family while you were aboard ship?
I was not married, of course, and I had a mother and a father who lived in a little town in Wisconsin, and we'd write each other, and that's about all we had.
How long did it take letters to get back and forth?
A month. They'd send them to an APO office, and you know, eventually we'd get a big bag of mail, and you know, that was a big time when that mail would arrive. And I had a few girlfriends that I'd write to, and they'd send me pictures and stuff, and you know, that was kind of our home thing. Once in a while, someone would send us a Life magazine or something. And the big thing aboard ships was to get a new, as I say, was to get a new movie. I bet we watched some movies 15 times. I mean, there was nothing for those men to do at night, so turn the movie on. Some of them could say the words before the actors could say them. It was funny.
I'll bet.
And then we got a new movie. That was exciting. Oh boy. Particularly when we got one that's kind of sexy. Any of the Betty Grable movies or any of those ever. It was really wild when that came.
Did you have times that while you were on ship, were people granted leave? Did you have off-duty times off the ship, or not really?
Not really. When we were in port, anchored in port, we could go if we were in an area where they had an officers club. Lady Beach had an officers club, and there were some officers clubs around. We could go ashore and go into the officers club and have a scotch or two and so forth and so on. And there was some R&R for people who had been long time aboard ship, and they would be sent to places like New Zealand. I remember one of our guys went to church station in New Zealand for an R&R, and some of this was done, but very little of this. I never got to do any R&R. I was aboard ship for about 14 months, and I never left the ship.
Okay. Where were you when the war ended? Were you getting ready to pull into the Japanese? We were getting ready.
We were in Leyte Gulf.
Getting ready
in the Philippines.
You were getting ready to.
Starting to load to go to the invasion of Japan.
Okay.
Yes.
Your return home. How'd you get back home?
Train from Portland, Oregon to Chicago, and Chicago to a little town in Wisconsin called Neenah.
Okay. How were you received when you came back home by family and friends?
Oh, they loved me. Great welcome, great parties, and
So you had a welcome home.
oh, great homecomings. Yes. And then the great preparation. We were all anxious to get our lives on with. We wanted to go back to college. I went back to college immediately. I went back to college that fall.
Can you talk about that going back to college, readjusting to civilian life, and
Yes. I was not married, but a lot of the married guys who were married, they didn't have any housing for them. They lived in Quonset huts. I happened to belong to a fraternity house, so I had enough time behind me, so I was able to get into a fraternity house. So I had a room in a fraternity house, so I was okay. But there are other people who there was such a deluge of people coming back that fall that there just was not enough housing, and so they lived everywhere.
okay. Are you a member of any veterans organizations?
I stayed in the Navy Reserve, and I went on 2 or 3 summer 2-week cruises or things. I went one to Virginia Beach, where we did minesweeper training. I went on another one where we landed troops of the Academy, West Point, on a mock invasion on the North Carolina coast. And I went on a third one, I forgot what I did, but I went on 3 2-week cruises during the summer. They're called cruises.
All in the same summer?
No. These are
3 different summers?
3 different summers. And then I got employed, and I got a wife, and then we got children, and things really got busy, so my reserve things went kind of downhill. And finally at the end I still kept active to some degree, so at the end of I think it was my 18th year, the Navy was trying to purge all the kind of inactive officers out of the Navy. So I got a letter from the Navy Department saying, you have 2 choices. You can either resign your reserve appointment, or you can go back in active duty. There wasn't much choice, so at that point I resigned at 18. They didn't want me to get to 20 years because then they'd have to start paying me the 20-year pension deal. So they had a huge purging in the Navy. This was probably in the late 60s, I guess. And they purged us all out of the Navy, everyone who wasn't on active duty or for anything.
Okay. Did you keep in touch with anybody that you knew while you were in the military, friends, or have you done any gone to any reuniting?
Not of the ship. The ship has never had a reunion, as best I know. If they did, I have not been invited, so I do not. I have kept up with a couple people. There's one fellow in Cincinnati that we have corresponded with, and I call once in a while, and another one in the East, but I've not seen any of these other than a little emailing and phone, and
What are their names?
I would have to do some thinking.
Oh, that's okay,
Yeah.
that's okay.
But the answer is there is not anyone on the ship that I have stayed in close contact with.
Okay.
The answer, no.
How did your wartime experience affect your life?
Oh, it made me grow up. Oh, in a big way. I can't imagine my grandson at the age of 17 or 18 being forced to do what I had to do. You just had to grow up. You had to take responsibility. You had to run with it. And if you didn't run with it, you failed. I mean, there's no question that I had a duty to do and I was going to do it. I worked my tail off.
Yeah.
I mean, I was going to get the best grades I could get in college, and I was going to get the best grades I could get in midshipman school. And I did. I got very, very good grades in midshipman school.
And that had probably played into your placements.
Yeah, and I worked very hard. I was scared to death. You know, when we first went in there, the first day, you know, that we sat in this huge thing. There must have been 500 of us sat in this big auditorium, and we got the old look at your left and your right because one of you isn't going to be there 3 months from now. And they washed about 30% of the class out because of one thing or another. And I didn't want to be washed out. When you got washed out, you went to sea as a apprentice seaman. Bingo. And I didn't want that. I thought that'd be a failure for me. It'd be a failure for my family, and I wasn't going to let that happen. So I worked and worked and worked.
What are some life lessons you learned from your military service?
Yeah, I guess the main one is I keep referring to is loyalty. I was just so proud to be part of a group that did so much for so many, and I still to this day, you know, stand up at attention when the flag comes by, and I salute, and the Star Spangled Banner still makes me feel tingly. I just, you know, I guess that's the thing that's done more for me. It's given me some discipline of life that I don't think my kids have. I don't think my grandkids have. It's just something that's inherent in me.
How has your military service impacted your feelings about war and the military in general?
War is terrible. War is terrible. I would like to abolish all wars, never have another one, ever.
Okay.
I mean, war is not what the movie portrays them to be. Wars are very brutal, nasty things. To see people get killed, or to see ships wounded, or to see an airplane go down, it's tragic. And if we can prevent that, it's all mean. But on the other hand, you know, I'm all for defending this country. I'm all for defending my homeland. And you know, I would support anything that needs to be done to defend it as long as it's done in the right way. I'm not anti-military, but I certainly am not a war hawk in the sense that let's go to war every time someone sneezes on us.
Right. What message would you like to leave for future generations who are going to hear and watch this?
One thing I'd like to have our schools do is teach our young people more history. I challenge people. I say go down to your local market, ask the checkout boy who we fought in World War II, and I'll guarantee you he won't know. He'll say Russia maybe. Try it sometime. He had no idea what happened, even who we fought in World War II. And we're not teaching history to our young people at all. We're teaching them a lot of social nonsense and so forth and so on, which is fine. I'm not against that, but I still would like to have more basic history taught in our schools. I think we moved away from that much too far. And if I had anything that I'd like to leave is let's go back to the basis and let's educate people on how great this country was, how much sacrifice there was to build it up, and that they have something that's very precious here, and let's not worry about stupid things like we seem to be about marriage and nonsense like that at times when we have really basic problems that we need to solve.
Okay. And then lastly, is there anything that you feel like we haven't discussed or that you think should be added to the interview?
I think we've covered most everything.
Okay.
And I appreciate the time that you've given and the project that you've given to Voices for Veterans. I talk to people about this and they say, gee, that's a wonderful idea. And I hope that someone uses this stuff and puts it into some kind of a book or something that carries this into the future, so it's just not all lost. So
That's
we
the
haven't gone
purpose.
through all this
Yeah, that's the
for
purpose.
nothing.
Yeah, that's the purpose of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
All
I
right.
think that's very important.
Thank you, Bob.
I appreciate what you've done.
All right, thank you.